I'm not sure what Dave Kopel's pre-show routine is at the Independence Institute, but he joins us on the program now. Dave, how you doing, sir?
Good. I've been stretching out, warming up. I'm ready to go.
I always picture like the montage from Rocky IV, and you're out there and you're beating the frozen beef, getting ready for Piers Morgan.
Yeah, I ran up Mount Sanitas before the show.
Listen, so I got to say, first of all, thank you for going on the Piers Morgan show and trying and actually doing a really good job when Piers would allow you of explaining why Piers Morgan was incorrect about so much of what he said.
Well, I will tell you frankly that I do the Piers Morgan show because it's what I should be doing in my job. It's something I feel I ought to do for the cause. But I don't do that for fun.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I mean, I try to have a good time doing it, but
and exactly. Yeah. But that's the thing. Look, if you don't go out there, if gun owners don't go out there, then what happens is Piers Morgan goes ahead and continues on with his show, and gun owners are not represented. And so, he's insisting, Dave, as you well know, the Second Amendment, designed with muskets in mind. The founders could not have envisioned handguns, could not have envisioned assault weapons, I believe was his phrase. And if you would be smart like England banned guns, and Dave, they've got no crime now. That was basically what he said, right?
Their handgun crime went up 40% after they banned handguns. And there's a 2001 study from King's College, London, which says that the evidence shows that in England, there's no link between the number of lawfully owned guns and gun use and crime.
And what was Piers Morgan's response when you told him that?
Well, that particular study I didn't mention.
Okay.
I'm saving that for next time.
Okay, but you were able to point out things like the United Nations named Scotland, for instance, the most violent country in the industrialized world.
Right.
And
Pierce's, his response is basically to change the topic and say, well, there are more gun homicides, in the United States, which is true.
Right.
But Pierce's point of view, apparently is like, well, somebody got killed with a knife, or like when O.J. Simpson murdered his ex-wife, or strangled with bare hands. Well, that's not an issue, but that's much nicer. Thank goodness a gun wasn't used. And then the fact is, based on a joint study in the 90s, and since the mid-90s when the study was done, U.S. crime overall has gone down, and British crime overall has gone up. But even as of the mid-90s, the overall violent crime rate in the United States was significantly lower than in Great Britain. And so he's happy they have there is less gun homicide in England. But you have to look, as I kept trying to tell him, you have to look at the total picture. If you could use a magic magnet and get rid of all the guns, you'd have less gun homicides, but you might have more crime overall, and that's the situation they have in England.
Absolutely. And we've talked about this before. You reviewed the gold standard of gun control, the Joyce Malcolm's Guns and Violence, the English Experience.
Yeah.
And, you go back to, let's say, the early part of the 20th century, before England and Great Britain started instituting a lot of their gun control reforms. Is it true, Dave, that even back then the United States had a higher rate of gun-related crime?
Yes. If we look at 1905,
right,
the United States is a country with a higher violent crime rate than England.
Okay.
That's not true anymore. But back then, the United States had the higher violent crime rate and had, on a state-based level, much more gun control than England did. England had essentially no gun control as of 1905. The gun laws of Montana today are vastly more restrictive than British gun control laws as of 1905. And England at the time had a very low crime rate. Now England has the most repressive gun laws in the Western world, what its proponents call the gold standard of gun control. That's the title, as you said, of the article that I wrote with Paul Gallant and Joanne Eisen. And they've got a higher violent crime rate than the United States.
And so, Dave, how do you get people, whether it's Piers Morgan or folks who just may be tuning in, hopefully the folks tuning in understood what Piers did not. The point that you were actually trying to make, that if you are the victim of violent crime, you're not necessarily thinking, Well, thank goodness it was this inanimate object that was used and not that one. You're the victim of a violent crime. You don't
Right.
want to live in a society. Like in England, we've seen the stories. People say, I'm afraid to leave my house at night.
Right.
It was huge news recently when a couple who had been burgled, I believe, 5 times, or was it 4 times, actually defended themselves against some burglars who broke in. That's huge because you're not really allowed to do that in England, or at least you weren't until the government came out very recently and said, no, people do have the right to defend themselves.
There have been a few reforms on some reforms on self-defense law itself,
Right.
fairly recently. But even then, in England, your guns have to be unloaded and locked up all the time. You're never issued a gun permit for self-defense. And so, yeah, you can theoretically use the gun, and I suppose some people do manage to get it out of their safe. But in England, your gun has to be stored in a separate safe from the ammunition. So you got to be, I suppose, awfully nimble and dexterous on that, dialing those combination locks to get the gun and the ammunition out in time when somebody kicks down your door at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And England, by the way, in addition to violent crime, which is the sort of the standard definition, is murder and manslaughter, rape, robbery, and serious assaults. England also has a hugely higher rate of home invasion burglaries. That's a point I brought up with Piers
Right.
the previous time I was on his show. And the reason is, if you talk to American burglars, they say that only about 13% of U.S. burglaries take place against occupied homes, whereas over about 60% of English burglaries do. And you can understand the burglar's reasoning is if you break into an occupied home, there's wallets and purses, so you get cash, and you don't have to sell it at a discount in a fencing operation, and it's easily portable. But, of course, when the victims are home, there's often violence perpetrated against them in the course of the burglary. And American burglars, the studies of both active burglars, those ones who are out on the street plying their trade, and ones in prison, consistently show that the vast majority of American burglars avoid occupied homes, spend a lot of time. It's the most time-consuming part of the burglar's job in America, is casing the joint to make sure people aren't home because they're afraid of getting shot, which is a reasonable occupational fear for them. With half of homes in America having guns and American self-defense laws being very clear that you can use a gun in the home for self-defense against a violent home intruder like a burglar. And, of course, thanks to the wins in Heller and Heller, the one jurisdiction in the country that wouldn't let you do that, Washington, D.C., now had to comply with the national human rights standards of the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, absolutely. And, by the way, Dave, we talked earlier today with Chuck Michelle. Well know who Chuck is. And he was up in San Francisco where the Ninth Circuit had heard oral arguments in 3 of the cases challenging California's May issue law. And the Peruta case was one of those oral arguments that were heard today. According to Chuck, he said that the state, or the county, the defense in this case,
San Diego County.
Exactly.
Yeah, the Sheriff's Department.
Was in essence conceding what the trial judge had said, that there is a right to carry, there is a right of self-defense outside of the home. The trial judge in Peruta had said that right could be satisfied by the carrying of an unloaded handgun, a California open carry, which of course now is illegal.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of really interesting discussion about how you could actually have a right to bear arms outside of the home, and yet California's May issue law somehow could withstand scrutiny, given that the open carry law has been struck down. Have they painted themselves into a bit of a corner there, you think?
Well, maybe, but we saw the Second Circuit Court of Appeals uphold New York's May issue, and it frequently abused. Rather than being May issue, it's like never issue system for handgun carry licensing. So, courts can simply say, well, there's the right, like if it exists outside the home, it's in a very attenuated way, and we will invent some kind of weak form of scrutiny and uphold the law under that.
All right. Well, listen.
And by the way, Chuck's got another case suing Orange County for this same issue of misusing California's statute and basically never issuing to people unless they can prove they have some special need, which is contrary to what the Second Amendment says. You don't need to prove your right to exercise any of your need to exercise any constitutional right. And just today I filed a brief in that case on behalf of the two major police training organizations in the United States, the International Law Enforcement Educators and Trainers Association and the International Association of Law Enforcement Firearms Instructors. Now, Orange County did not consent to the filing of my brief, so what I do is I filed a motion that says, Dear Ninth Circuit, please accept this brief, and we'll hopefully hear from them in a while, and they will accept the brief and consider that, the police perspective on this issue.
I hope that they will. Listen, Dave, I really appreciate you coming on the program tonight, sir. It is great talking to you as always, and look forward to doing this again very soon.
Sounds good.
Thank you, sir. Dave Kopel, Research Director at the Independence Institute. By the way, I am proud to tell you, because I'm proud to tell you, I'll probably tell you a lot between now and next August when the Independence Institute's ATF dinner is going to be held, the ATF party. I have wanted to go to this ever since I learned about it. But it's out in California, it's out in Colorado, and it's in the summer, and it's usually very difficult for me to go. But the Independence Institute asked me to be the speaker at next year's ATF party. So as we get closer to next August, which I realize is still quite a ways away, I'll be letting you know how you can get tickets. It's always a great deal of fun. Sporting clays in the morning, cigars and drinks in the afternoon, and then a dinner and speech that evening. Just a great day among not just Second Amendment supporters, but lovers of liberty and freedom. All right, when we come back to the program, a lover of liberty and freedom, Mr. Kurt Slichter is going to be with us. There will be synth pop. Stick around. We will be right back with more Cam and Company here on NRAnews.com and Sirius XM Patriot.